Hey, folks, welcome to the most censored news, the interviews version, where I talk to amazing people and we discuss what's going on in the world and why shit's so screwed up. I hope you caught yesterday's interview with Richard Wolff. If not, please check that out. Please make sure you hit subscribe and thumbs up. Today, I have someone I highly respect, and she just does excellent work. Margaret Kimberley. She's executive editor and senior columnist at Black Agenda Report, an excellent website. If you're looking for the media that's not the mainstream media, as everyone goes, well, I don't know where to get my news. Well, Black Agenda Report is one of those places. And her book, Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents, was published in 2020 by Steerforth Press. Please welcome Margaret Kimberley. Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me. Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me. There's a lot to talk about.
Yes, there is. One of the, and I haven't even, I cover a lot of stories, but I haven't covered this story at all because I don't know. I mean, part of it was just too much going on, but part of it was that it seemed like people were just getting flooded with it by the mainstream media, and I just kind of was like, ugh. But there is a deeper side to understanding it, and it is that trade between Brittany Griner, the prisoner swap, and the Russian arms dealer, as our media calls him, and there's a lot going on there. It makes Joe Biden look like some sort of superhero who went in and saved Brittany Griner, and of course, she shouldn't have been in prison at all.
Right.
Pretty much everyone agrees on that, but there's a deeper side to this story, I feel like.
Oh, sure, there is. It goes back to Victor Bout, who, yes, was an arms dealer starting in the 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and pretty much a free-for-all in the new Russian Federation. And he got some old Soviet cargo planes and began shipping all kinds of things all over the world, including arms. And that was true, including to Iraq on behalf of the US in 2003 after the invasion. But somehow he fell
so
out.
He was also a U.S. arms dealer.
Of course he was. And also, who has the biggest, worst arms dealers in the world? Well,
Right.
the U.S. Defense Department is mercenaries like Blackwater, which has changed its name several times. I think it's called Constellus now. But at any rate, in 2008, the U.S. set him up in a sting operation in Bangkok. And the agents posed as Colombian rebels and got him to say he would kill Americans. And after several years of fighting against his extradition, the U.S. pressuring the Thailand government, he was brought to the U.S. 2011, of course, found guilty. Everyone's found guilty in these cases, and sentenced to 25 years. And the judge in the case said she felt it was excessive, but with these mandatory sentences, she had no choice. So basically, Victor Bout was kidnapped by the U.S. and had been sitting in a U.S. prison ever since. Along comes Brittany Griner with CBD oil in her suitcase. In Russia's very strict laws, marijuana is illegal, period, in any formulation. Hard for us to imagine. I'm sure being a 6'9" Black woman, she attracted more scrutiny, but it was excessive. And so people were rightly concerned about her, but the Russians from the beginning said, Griner for Bout. Now, the U.S. tried to get this guy Whalen out, who the Russians claim is a spy, and he's in jail in Russia. But Trump didn't want to swap Bout for Whalen. The Biden administration didn't want to swap Bout for Whalen until Brittany Griner comes along. And now they're trying to add this other guy. Russia said all along, and one of the what should be scandalous in this case is that she could have been freed months ago. But they finally agree to what Russia said all along, and then whisk her off to a reintegration center on an army base. She didn't go home it was about a week that she was there.
You mean the U.S. whisked her off?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. And So people said, Brittany is home. I'm like, no, she's not. She's on an army base in Texas. But finally, she is free and with her wife and her family and friends.
I cannot conceive of what goes on at a reintegration camp for an American.
I suspect some good cop, bad cop. The person's vulnerable at that point. They're glad to be out. So I suspect it's a lot of good treatment, but with a lot of propaganda. Let's just call it propaganda, what
Yeah.
it is. And, she's thanking Biden for her rescue and all. There's no reason to thank him for anything. But I just felt as if there was more to this story. The U.S. kidnaps people. Alex Saab, a Venezuelan diplomat, the attempt to kidnap Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive, and get the dumb Canadian vassals to help do it, which ended up with the Chinese snatching 2 Canadians. So I think it's important to remember that the U.S. does these things all over the world. Other countries don't like it. And when they have the opportunity to use leverage against the United States, they will.
We kidnapped Jean-Bertrand Aristide from Haiti and dropped him in the middle of Africa.
Yes, they did in 2004. And Haiti's that's another story. One of the many coups and examples of interference of the U.S. against that country. But that's the story that I think people should know. It's greater than this athlete who became a political pawn. She was a pawn in part because of this established U.S. policy of being a bully around the world.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that of Russia's laws on CBD oil are draconian and ridiculous. At the same time, since the U.S. has the most prisoners in the world, the largest prison state in the world, we probably have more people locked up for marijuana and cannabis than Russia does.
I'm sure. Well, 2 million people, as you say, more people in prison than any other country. A greater percentage of the population in prison than any other country, people serving long sentences for minor offenses, and nobody doing anything about it. Biden made this before the midterm elections that he was pardoning anyone who was convicted in federal court for marijuana possession only. Well, guess what? That's only a handful of people who are convicted just for possession and nothing else. So how many people did it free? None, not one person.
It's so, I'm sorry to laugh. When I found that out, I just cracked up that our mainstream media was acting like Biden frees all these, low level criminals or whatever, quote unquote criminals for having marijuana. He freed zero
people, and the pardon doesn't really mean much. It doesn't even expunge your record. So it did, aside from giving him good press for those people who don't bother to look into things, it was meaningless. But Biden, lest we forget, is the architect of when he was in the Senate. He took the lead in passing Bill Clinton's crime bill back in the 90s and bragged that it does everything except give the death penalty for jaywalking. I mean, he bragged about how many people it put away. So this man is responsible for mass incarceration in the country. And that's something that should never, ever be forgotten.
Yeah, and many of these things that he supposedly did or attempted to do leading into the midterm election so that he could look like the Democrats actually do something, with the freeing of these zero prisoners and with the student debt relief that has not actually happened. With both of those, it's Biden doing a tiny little Band-Aid procedure that is an attempt to deal with a problem he largely helped create. Like, he helped create the prison industrial complex by just what you just said. And the student loan debt, he was the one that put forward the bill that made it impossible to declare bankruptcy for student loan debt.
Yeah, he did. And, you call it Band-Aids, but it's actually, it's worse than that. It's nothing. People say, well, it could have been thrown out in court. I believe he should have thrown a Hail Mary and issued an executive order and relieved everybody of their student loan debt. I think he should have tried to do that. Even if the courts, then you use your bully pulpit, then you can say, I was doing my best to help people. No, instead he came up with this $10,000 or $20,000. I mean, I know people who went to public colleges and they're like 70, 80, $100,000 in debt. So it would have helped a small number of people, but he knew it was going to be thrown out in a court case and said, oh, well, I tried. And, he gets this, and these progressives, so-called, in Congress going on Twitter saying he's gotten rid of student loan debt. I mean, just blatant lies to help him lie to people. So we once again have, I call him President Harm Reduction, because what were we told in 2020? Anybody who didn't want to vote for him, well, he's harm reduction. You got to get rid of Trump. He's harm reduction. So that's my my own nickname for him.
You mentioned a little earlier Alex Saab. I was wondering if you want to talk about him for a minute, and maybe, since he gets so little media coverage, maybe explain who he is to people.
He was a Venezuelan diplomat, and it's important to remember he had a diplomatic passport. And we've all heard of diplomatic immunity, haven't we? So people like that are not supposed to be arrested, especially since he didn't break any crime against the U.S. At any rate, Venezuela is still suffering under U.S. sanctions. He was flying to, I believe, Iran. His plane refueled in Cabo Verde, Cape Verdean Islands off the coast of West Africa. And the U.S. Pressured that government to snatch him and take him off the plane and charge him with money laundering. It was one of the kidnappings that I'm talking about. The U.S. had no jurisdiction over him, had no business snatching a diplomat. Then they snatch him and bring him here. Not even an extradition, really. No extradition filed, and he's going to be on trial in Florida. And he's arguing that as a diplomat, he should never have been arrested, and the U.S. has no jurisdiction over his case. Now, this is one of these cockamamie schemes cooked up by Mike Pompeo, the horrible Secretary of State under Trump, but which is continued under Biden. It's just one example of, what were we told about Trump? He's a fascist. He's evil. He's Hitler's cousin. He's this, he's that. Biden comes in and continues all his foreign policies, and in some cases makes it even worse. So this man is unjustly imprisoned. This is a violation of U.S. law, a violation of international law. Can you imagine if another country snatched a diplomat? What would we be told here? We'd be told we had to make war. We'd have to invade someone. And that New York Times headline is actually incorrect. It's not a real extradition.
Right.
But
also, they just call him a financial ally, not a diplomat.
I know. They don't mention that at all. And that is another major pet peeve of mine. The corporate media, especially the New York Times, just acts like Biden's mouthpiece. You don't learn anything that you need to know by reading the New York Times especially about foreign policy. But that the Saab case is just one example of the sanctions regime that kills people. I mean, as surely as bombs and bullets do, by depriving countries of being able to access financial markets. There was a study done about Venezuela, and some 50,000 people died as a direct result of U.S. sanctions. And then the kidnapping of this man. So I think it's important for people to know what goes on around the world and how these policies are bipartisan. These foreign policy initiatives are bipartisan. So you had a Democrat harm reduction take over from the horrible, evil Republican and then continue his policies. There's no reason why the Biden administration should be continuing this prosecution of Alex Saab.
Yeah, and that's a great point, that economic sanctions create loads of death. It's not just bullets. and in some circumstances, maybe even cause more than bullets and bombs. In the case of Afghanistan, we're killing more over there right now than we killed at least last year with our troops over there. And then you have, there's many other examples, but Syria, 90% of the people are in poverty in Syria right now. And, the number of people dying, and of course, who dies first from tough situations like that and lack of food and medicine? It's going to be the poorest, the elders, the babies. And for the U.S. to look and say, oh, yeah, we're helping change that country by killing off their babies is insanity.
Well, what did Madeleine Albright say? Worth it? Oh, it's worth.
It was. They said. Reports said 500,000 children have been killed by the sanctions on Iraq, and Madeleine Albright says we believe it was worth it.
Yes, she did. Well, in Afghanistan, I'm glad you mentioned that the U.S. stole Afghanistan's assets after leaving that country. It's approximately, I think, $6 billion. People are going hungry. People sell their kidneys in order to survive. And we've been told that they've now banned education for women, and we should know that. But how many women have been killed by the U.S. theft of their assets? So when the U.S. loses in Afghanistan or loses in Syria, talk about a sore loser. Well, we may have to, and there are still U.S. troops in Syria, by the way. Well, we may have to leave, or we may not have won, but we're going to punish you forever. It's cruel. It's a violation of law. It's a violation of human rights. It's a war crime to exact retaliation against the civilian population is literally a war crime, and it's carried out by president after president.
And one of the most breathtaking clips that I have played a couple of times on various segments is Secretary of State at the time, Rex Tillerson, in conversation with Condoleezza Rice in front of a crowd, talks about the sanctions on North Korea and says, we can tell they're working because fishermen are going out later and later into the year because they don't have food and they're dying, and the boats wash up on the South Korean shore because these fishermen have starved to death frozen to death on their boats. And then he concludes by saying, so these sanctions are really starting to hurt. So his analysis is, we killed these fishermen because they starved to death. We're winning.
Yes, and North Korea is the country that's demonized. We're told it's a horrible dictatorship. It's like a running joke about North Korea being so awful, but you have a U.S. official talking about what sanctions do, how cruel they are, how they kill people, but North Korea is the country that's demonized.
I want to circle back to Russia and Ukraine here. We just had the superstar celebrity himself, Zelensky, arrive in D.C. and speak to Congress, which, how often are foreign leaders speaking to Congress? It's like Netanyahu, the Pope, and Zelensky. Is that those are the ones?
I don't even remember the Pope. I remember Netanyahu, and that was the Republicans trying to hurt Obama when and I never give Obama credit for anything, when he quite rightly signed the nuclear deal with Iran, which eased U.S. sanctions against Iran, which Trump threw out, and Biden continued Trump's policy once again. But anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. But this Zelensky appearance was really the height of cynicism. This all happened because Congress is about to change hands. Come January, Republicans will be in the majority in the House. The Biden administration was concerned that they could not get billions more to Ukraine, and so they wanted this spending bill to pass, this omnibus spending bill, which contains yet more money for Ukraine, even as people may be kicked off of Medicaid because these COVID relief bills are expiring. But at any rate, so Zelensky is the conquering hero. I mean, it was so bizarre to watch. I mean, I forced myself to watch it. I said, I need to see these things.
Thank you. I couldn't stomach it. So thanks for watching.
Yeah, I know. I did it so you didn't have to.
Yeah.
But Congress members jumping up and down, waving Ukrainian flags, Slava Ukraine, which was the rallying cry of the Nazi sympathizers in Ukraine. I don't care if people don't want to hear it. All my life, I was told Nazis were bad, swastikas were bad. It was proof of a hate crime. Now we have this country where people have swastika tattoos, giving the Hitler salute, and you're told not to see it, or it's a Putin talking point, or, well, the president's Jewish, so obviously it doesn't matter. Well, there's some contradiction there that should be explained to us rather than just being dismissed. Ukraine's this divided country. Half of the country hated the Soviet Union and were glad when they were invaded by Germany during World War II. And to this day, identify with that with regime. Stepan Bandera, the leading collaborator, his birthday is a national holiday in Ukraine. But Ukraine is run by oligarchs, just as actually more so than Russia is. And some of those oligarchs happen to be Jewish. It's a very strange configuration of events, but it's not something that should be ignored. At any rate, we had members of Congress sounding like Nazi sympathizers from the 40s. Zelensky wears his trademark, outfit of, like he's in battle. He was an actor. I always tell people that he was an actor.
He's in like a G.I. Joe action figure that went to the gym or something.
Yes, that's a good description. And he was put in office by an oligarch, a guy named Kolomoisky. And he won because he said he would bring peace. And we have to go back a little bit. The Obama administration in 2014 took sides in Ukraine's internal dispute, helped the right wing in a coup overthrow the elected president. But half the country did not want this coup government. And the Donbass region, which is borders Russia, is close to Russia ethnically and philosophically. They've been in a state of civil war. So the killing did not start this year. I just want people to know that. But at any rate, Ukraine has now gotten $100 billion. And I think he was invited not just to make sure that this bill passed, but it's a continuation of war propaganda to shut people up, to keep Americans who are opposed or who question or who have anything to say that differs from this narrative, to quiet us down, to get rid of any talk of peace. This could be over. One of the reasons I have no respect for Zelensky is he's letting his people be used as cannon fodder. So the United States can engage in this futile effort to weaken Russia, to break up Russia, to get rid of Putin, something that's not going to happen. But there's trench warfare, like in the days of World War I, and Ukraine is taking on huge casualties. I think it's accurate to say they are losing to Russia, and that was another reason to invite him and quiet anybody down who points out that inconvenient information. But I call this the year of Ukraine. We've been, blue and yellow flags stuffed down our throats. I mean, he's on the Grammys. He wanted to speak before the World Cup because you can't have too much war propaganda because it's BS, right, and most people know it. And they wouldn't have to gin up this fever for more war if that were not true. So you see, I was so really saddened to see on Twitter Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who is known as the only member of Congress who voted against the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. And she had these progressive bona fides all these years. And what does she say on Twitter? We've got to fight Russia. We've got to give Ukraine billions of dollars. I mean, it was really.
Did she really?
Ugh. Yeah. It was horrible. There are no progressives in, well, they don't do anything in domestic policy either. But in foreign policy, they do nothing. They wrote this mealy-mouthed, fence-straddling letter calling for peace in Ukraine. And they couldn't even stick by that for 24 hours. Biden barked at them and they retracted the letter the next day.
Yeah, they backed out on it about a day later. So there's so many threads I want to pull on out of everything you just said. But one is, I remember that before this happened, before February, we over the past like decade, every time American media would mention Ukraine, they would often mention one of the most corrupt countries in, the Europe, Russia sphere. They would always talk about how corrupt, insanely corrupt Ukraine is. And I think that was largely true,
Yeah.
but now they never mention that. And it begs the question, if we're sending $100 billion over there, is all of it getting to the front lines? Which, in fact, CBS and CNN actually reported before they retracted it under pressure that upwards of 70% is not actually ending up in battle. It's getting sold to, whatever, somebody on the black market. So you are just funneling billions of dollars to what, at least until a few months ago, was the most corrupt country in Europe.
Yeah, they used to. I mean, there were glimmers of truth. They would talk about the problem with the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They would say that it was a corrupt country. They would say it's the poorest country in Europe, and of course, the most corrupt country would be the poorest, wouldn't it? Excuse me, but all that disappeared down the memory hole, and now it's Ukraine, the noble country where everybody's an angel. Recently the president of Nigeria mentioned that Ukrainian arms were ending up in Africa. Well, of course, they're ending up everywhere. Let's talk about the corruption here, just handing money over to the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
I mean, the Raytheons and McDonnell Douglases and the Lockheeds and so all of them have made a fortune. And but these arms are going everywhere, and the U.S. is actually running out of weapons. It's so funny. There's so much projection when they talk about, let's say Russia's running out of missiles. No, it's actually the EU. They're tapped. They don't have anything else to give to Ukraine. Russia's not actually, because they still have an industrial capacity, they're not running out of anything. So we have lies about that. About the amount of money that's going over there, about what happens to it. The arms are ending up everywhere, and the money is the non-defense spending. We have no idea who's getting it. Actually, we do have an idea who's getting it. The Ukrainian oligarchs are getting it, and I tell people who want to quote unquote give to Ukraine, I'm like, if you pay taxes, you already gave. So I wouldn't worry about it. Yes, absolutely. We have no idea where this money is going. And there are so many needs in this country that are just not mentioned. We're told we can't connect the two. We're told, well, can't you do both? But that's not how it works. People need housing, healthcare, all kinds of things. And we're told, oh, well, just, too bad. Just wave your Ukrainian flag a little harder or something.
Yeah, if you collect enough of them, you can build a small hut out of your Ukrainian flags, a small tent. I just did a segment 2 weeks ago on the Pentagon failing their latest audit, their fifth audit. And that is, of course, the fifth time they failed, meaning they've never accurately been audited. And in this latest one, they say they can't account for over half of their assets. They largely do not know where these trillions of dollars are going and whose pockets they're ending up in. And many times that is not actual chunks of money. It could be various things, buildings they don't realize they own and stuff like that. But there's also pallets of money. Back in 2013, it was revealed that a pallet of something like $12 billion of shrink-wrapped cash went missing in Iraq. You have Matthew Ho, the former troop, and he was a soldier in Afghanistan, who said he was given cash to put in a safe by his bed and hand out to Afghanistan like warlords to try and get them to do what the U.S. wanted. And he said the most he ever had was $1 million in shrink-wrapped bills in a locker by his bed. No one checked up on where he handed this money out. It's mind-blowing.
Well, the last president of Afghanistan before the Taliban took over, left town with so much money he couldn't stuff it all in a plane. I mean, millions of left money on the tarmac. I mean, it was insane. And to the very end, we were told Afghanistan's army was, they didn't have an army. It melted away. They weren't paid, and that was the end of the 20-year long uh, forever war. But I didn't know the Pentagon was audited. That was the shocking thing to me. I knew they just got whatever they asked for. I was like, really? They go through an audit? But it's apparently doesn't matter.
They were legally required to go through one since the early 90s, and they never did it until 5 or 6 years ago. It costs like $600 million with 1,000 auditors, and every year they come back and say, well, we failed, but we failed better than we did last year.
Yeah, it's I think people need to know the most discretionary spending in this country is for defense. It's $800 billion. It is bipartisan. Democrats, even when they run Congress, they spend as much money as Republicans. When the second half of Trump's term, and the Democrats took control of the House. Hooray, the Democrats are in control. They gave him more than he asked for. So these things continue to be bipartisan, but if it's anything for the people, what are we told? The answer is always no. Where's that? If it's anything for us, there's all these questions. Where's that money going to come from? How are you going to pay for that? If it's anything that benefits people, all these arguments against student loan debt relief. Well, they should never have taken out the loan, or I paid my loans back, something stupid. But there are no questions. And I thank you for that graphic of how much money is given to the military. Mm-hmm. And there's never any question. And if you go to Washington, I remember I started visiting Washington some years ago. They have advertisements in the metro system for McDonnell Douglas or Lockheed or Raytheon or any of them. Like, right. I don't know, the New York City subway, it's like about clothes or the latest Broadway show or something. Nope. It's like, just in case you didn't know who ran this place. Yep. It's all about the defense contractors, the military industrial complex.
My favorite point with the ads for Raytheon and General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin that you see on Fox News or CNN or whatever is, why do you think they have those? Do you think it's because some, grandma in Poughkeepsie is thinking of buying an F-35? Or is it because they want to own CNN? They say to CNN, stop covering our stuff or we're going to pull our multi-million-dollar ad budget.
Basically. And so it does that. It keeps them in line, and it propagandizes us. I think Americans don't acknowledge enough the degree of indoctrination that we're under. I mean, it's subliminal. If you see these ads over and over again, it just becomes normalized. And the idea that you can cut this spending is something that people censor themselves and may not even realize they're censoring themselves. When it's become normal. And talk about propaganda and indoctrination in the movies. You cannot, if a movie has any soldiers in it or visuals in anything, the Defense Department has to vet the script, the entire script. So your latest superhero movie or monster movie or love story or anything dealing with the Defense Department cannot be made unless the Defense Department likes it. And what does that do? They don't have to tell you that we can have forever wars. If you see movie after movie after movie and the Defense Department is in the credits, well, you really have to be intentional about questioning that. And that's one of the ways in which they get away with this continued, I'm going to call it a theft of our public resources.
To go back to when we were discussing the Nazis in Ukraine and the U.S. alignment now, like you mentioned, even the New York Times and other mainstream media outlets back in 2014 called these neo-Nazi brigades accurately, and now they won't call them that. Right. And I'm wondering, is this How shocked do you feel? Do you feel the U.S. empire has been in certain ways aligned with Nazis for a long time? In fact, there was Operation Paperclip after World War II, where
Mhm.
we brought Nazi scientists back to work in in NASA and other
Mhm.
fields. Or is this, should we be shocked, or is this par for the course?
Well, I would hope we'd be shocked that the reality and truth has been turned on its head, and something we've always been told is evil is simply now is not so bad after all. But the U.S. does this to in order to maintain its effort to have hegemony over the world. So, for example, with jihadists. Lest we forget who created Al Qaeda, the US. What were we told in Afghanistan? The Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden, people like him got millions of dollars from the US. And if you talk about 9/11, you're not allowed to talk about that blowback. So the US will cut deals with these people who, on the one hand, we're told are terrible. They backed jihadists to destroy Libya and then sent them on to Syria. And it's frankly a good thing that Russia stepped in and wouldn't allow them to win, so that we had another horrible a humanitarian crisis that's even worse than what we have now. So it could be jihadists, it could be Nazis, it could be all kinds of people. If they're on the side of the U.S., suddenly they are not so bad. And having talked about Libya and Syria, I don't know, these statistics sometimes stick in my head. 35 million people displaced in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Somalia, all in the war on terror. 35 million people displaced from Bush to the present time, however many presidents that is.
And yeah, that's a great statistic. I hadn't heard that one. I did see that the estimates are that 6 million have died from our wars on terror
Mhm.
over the past 20 years. That it's 1 million, roughly 1 million directly, and
Mhm.
5 million indirectly, destroying clean water and infrastructure and causing so much migration and things like that. And I feel like we don't hear those numbers enough.
No, we don't. And it's so funny how certain people like a Bush, nobody, the corporate media, they don't talk about the horrible things he did. Obama, you can't, he's the untouchable. I mean, talk about, do you remember Reagan's Teflon? People said he had Teflon.
Yeah,
Nobody has it like
yeah,
Obama does. I
yeah.
mean, destroy this ongoing humanitarian crisis, the migration across the Mediterranean, that is all because of Obama and Hillary Clinton and their policy in Libya. And it's just disappeared. It's like they'll talk about it and not, how do you talk about that and not mention him? But he's the golden child for I don't know what to call it, the 1%, the ruling class, the American oligarchs. I could go on. And all of those things they did that created so much damage to the world are just swept under the rug. But Trump, who did, I'd say, quantifiably less damage. I don't want to let him off the hook, but he's constantly vilified. Of course, he helps the process. He's so stupid. But all the vilification heaped upon him, and these other people are criminals. I mean, they're war criminals, and they're never described as such, and that is a great tragedy.
Yeah, I would always like to talk about how, yes, Trump is a racist. He had racist actions. He's been racist his whole life, going back to his real estate days. And he's a horrific sociopathic human being. But what was interesting, what I felt was more fascinating, is whenever he would do something for his own reasons that would try and decrease our endless war state. He tried to pull the troops out of Syria. He
Yep.
tried to end the Cold War with North Korea. Each time you would see the white blood cells of the military state jump on the infection and stop any of that from happening. What was it? It was within 9 days of him saying he was taking the troops out of Syria that there was the chemical attack that now 4 OPCW whistleblowers have come forward and said didn't happen. And of course, that turned Trump around. Troops stay in Syria. With Afghanistan, he was going to pull the troops out of Afghanistan. And then that ridiculous story about Russia paying Taliban to kill U.S. troops came out. So it was really instructive to see that.
Oh, absolutely. Trump was they would talk about him being a liar over some minor thing. I mean, he's always lying about something stupid that, it was clear it was a lie. They're like, Trump is a liar. He's a liar. But it'd always be about, Trump University or some nonsense. But you're absolutely right. If he tried to live up to what he campaigned on in his foreign policy, he was immediately vilified for it. I remember when he finally met Putin, it was people said you could tell that Putin controlled. I remember that press conference. It was so bizarre. People would, and talk about indoctrination. You could look at his face. You can tell Putin owns it. And I'm looking at his face and I'm like, he looks like he had a bad meeting to me. I don't understand what people were saying. And that was, of course, the whole purpose of Russiagate, was to make sure that anybody who had a big idea about normalizing relationships between the US and Russia was shut down. And so the days of Reagan, remember Reagan calling the Soviet Union an evil empire, but then he ends up with these deals with Gorbachev. I mean, they actually significantly reduced the numbers of nuclear weapons. Now, since then, all these treaties with Russia have been allowed to die. The US will, and this has been going on for several presidents, withdraw unilaterally, let treaties expire, and now it is off the table for these two nuclear superpowers to have a decent relationship. And that is all because of these maniacs in the State Department, Victoria Nuland and Blinken and all these horrible people who really believe in these fantasies. But everything they do to try to enhance America's power ends up blowing back. Ukraine is a sinkhole of money. Their policies have destroyed the economies of European countries. I mean, they really believe, these people also are just not very smart. They really thought that if they sanctioned Russia, its economy would crash. Well, it hasn't. And so the European countries who should be getting natural gas from Russia, that's the thing that makes most sense to them, now are in recession, now are going to freeze this winter. And it's all because of these horrible people we have running foreign policy. But I think we should keep in mind that there will always be somebody horrible running U.S. foreign policy, because those are the dictates of the people who really run the country.
I want to get your opinion on what you think the root cause is for why the U.S. has pushed for this proxy war. It doesn't mean there's no culpability for Russia invading, but the U.S. has been helping create the conditions for this and pushing for it for years. 2014, but before that, even the U.S. backed Maidan coup in 2014. But my feeling, and I'll give you my feeling. My feeling is that the U.S. the U.S. empire had seen the cooperation happening between China, Russia, and Europe. And they realize this is a threat to their economic hegemony. And unlike other countries where they can just invade them or coup them, they don't have it so easy with Russia or China. And so, this was a way to push that, although it seems like they're not prepared for some of the ramifications.
No, they really, this time last year, we were hearing that Russia's going to invade Ukraine. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. And what they were doing was instigating the Ukrainians to get the Russians to do something so they could sanction Russia. They could kill the Nord Stream pipeline. And they were instigating the Ukrainians to attack the Donbass region, daring the Russians not to defend this Russian-speaking, Russian-connected region. So the Bush, I keep calling him Bush, I guess because they're all the same, right? The Biden administration did instigate that. And do you remember in January, Biden, after all this talk of Russia invading, and sometimes when he blurts things out, he actually does us a favor by telling us what's really going on. He said, well, if it's a little incursion, it might not be so bad. And so he gave the game away. They wanted Russia to do something that would give them an excuse to kill Nord Stream pipeline, to sanction Russia, to damage their economy, because they want the US to run the whole world, which it can't do. It just can't do it.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. Russia and China are very close now. Xi Jinping said, what did he say? We're better than allies. I don't know what's better than an ally, but it tells you.
Bedfellows.
I don't know. But it happened because both countries have to protect themselves from the US. So now, and this is the other thing that I find interesting, going back to Nixon going to China, part of the goal was to pull China away from then the Soviet Union, but everything the US does now pushes them closer and closer together. And so it is this misguided effort to break up those alliances, to end, as you point out, Europe's any connection that Europe has with Russia. And now they succeeded in doing that, but to the detriment of Europe. And also, and this is very cynical, to force the Europeans to buy fracked gas from the US, liquefied natural gas from here, which is more expensive and more damaging environmentally. What's worse, fracked gas or natural gas? Well, the one the US is pushing on European countries, but they think they can, and Taiwan, that's their next thing. I was like, so Ukraine blew up in your faces. Now you're trying to screw around with China and send Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. I mean, it's always something everywhere in the world. The idea there was a unipolar world to the detriment of the world, but that's over. It's over. Russia is back. China you're not going to undo China's economic prowess. You aren't. You're not going to break them up. But these people live in this fantasy land, dangerous fantasy land, where they think so. So one of the things to be concerned about with giving these Patriot missiles to Ukraine is you're escalating a conflict. We could have a hot war with Russia. Yeah. But that's basically why they do these things. They want the US to run the whole world, this doctrine of full spectrum dominance, which just is not possible. It is not possible without creating havoc all over the world. And it's just not possible to carry out because the rest of the world is just saying no. Why do you think countries like India, for example, which is a US ally, the US tried to tell them don't buy Russian oil, and they said, actually, we're going to buy oil from wherever we want. And so they continued to do so. And that's where we are. And Biden, I don't see any change until Biden's out of office. He's an old school hawk. He always was. And they've made Ukraine the centerpiece of all their foreign policy. I don't think they thought it was going to stay that way, but because everything they thought was going to happen didn't happen their way, now they are stuck. And there's no way out for them. The best thing is to talk. But I think that ship has sailed. The Russians now are not interested in talking. I don't know if you're aware or your viewers are aware of Angela Merkel, the former German chancellor, gave this interview and she basically admitted, the Minsk agreements, we never meant that. Right. So basically she told the Russians, which they already knew, that they can't trust the West, that there's nothing serious about the agreements, nothing serious about their promises. And so here we are in this situation. I think what we need is for people to rise up, and it's been very difficult. There's very weak left in this country, obviously a very weak left in Europe. They have succeeded in demonizing Russia to such an extent that people feel like they can't speak out about this without looking like, Putin's puppet, or even people on the left arguing about should you blame Russia more, blame the US more. Actually, you can make both arguments and say we should be talking to bring about peace, to end this.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point. It's gotten so insane that I just did a small comedy tour with Graham Elwood, who I have a podcast with, and we went to Germany, but we had trouble finding a venue because the first two said, oh, we can't have you here because we actually support Ukraine.
Exactly. And Germany, and
Like,
it's horrible. It's horrible what, especially Germany. I think, I don't know a lot about Germany, but I get the feeling that with Russia being demonized so thoroughly, they're no longer seen as the bad people. So they have jumped on this bad bandwagon more than anybody. They've been sanctioning journalists. People basically do not have the right to differ, or they're punished. Professors have lost their jobs. Anyone who says anything outside of the narrative, other European countries as well. So I remember all this talk of totalitarianism in Russia and in the Soviet Union. Now Russia, Putin doesn't give people free speech. But these European countries, and the UK is the worst. They're the US number one vassal in this regard. They were talking, by the way, Ukraine and Russia, they were talking. Turkey's been the broker of attempted broker, and they were meeting in Istanbul.
It came out they almost had a peace deal in April, and
Yep.
and then the UK via the US, or at the direction of the US, went to meet with Zelensky and told him not to sign anything.
Yeah, it's like, actually, you don't want that. You don't want that.
Yeah.
Volodymyr. No, you don't. So I think it's important for people to know that.
I don't want to run out of time to talk about Hakeem Jeffries, the new leader of the Democrats in the House, taking Nancy Pelosi's place. If we can have a moment of silence for Nancy Pelosi and the gobs of money that she will be remembered by. But Hakeem Jeffries, I did a video a few weeks ago on his top donors, which it's easy to find out. It's at opensecrets.com or .org or whatever. And it's the three of the top five are Israel lobbying firms, including AIPAC. And then beyond that, it's giant real estate corporations like Blackstone. It's JP Morgan Chase. It is just the worst of the worst funding this guy. And it's like, who expects him to do anything for the people when those are his biggest backers?
Well, you don't get that position. You don't get to be the leader of Democrats in the House without being a tool of the U.S. oligarchy. You're not considered for that position. And of course, it's like, oh, he's the first Black person to lead a blah, 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 and whatever. But that's my piece in Black Agenda Report. And I wrote it at the same time of the stab in the back of the railroad workers. Basically, just to mention that very briefly, Biden could sign an executive order and give railroad workers their sick days, period, end of story. But there was this tortured thing in the House, and no, this is the best deal we can get, and these horrible people claiming that this is the best thing they could do, and it was all a lie. But you have the New York Times, they had a puff piece about Jeffries, and I said, oh, well, definitely, he's the next guy in line. But he is in line because of what you just said. He told some horrible joke about Israel is the sixth borough of New York, and Israel today and Israel tomorrow, and it's awful. But that's how you get those positions. You get them because you toe the line. And there's no reason. He's not a progressive. You don't get those. The purpose of the House leader is to make sure that the progressives stay silent and that they never get together. They never have the courage to stand up. And so that's why he's in the job. So should they get their majority back, he would be the Speaker of the House. I'm sure that will happen in the not too distant future, but he's the same. He's the same as these other people, and that's why he's in that job.
Yeah, I think those are all perfect points. You don't get to that position in our system unless you have already been vetted and your funding sources come from the right places. Obama was a great example where he had former Treasury Secretary Rubin was running around in Obama's Chicago Senate days saying this is the guy, meaning they already had approved this guy. He had been vetted. They had seen what he stood for. And so there was actually no worry. Even I supported him in 2008 because I was young and naive and thought there could be some kind of change. And by 2009, it had actually helped reveal the entire system to me. So it was useful in that regard. But they knew exactly how he would behave, and he did exactly what they wanted. And what was it? A month after Obama got out of office, he ran to Wall Street and gave a $400,000 speech, which was basically his payoff for having been good to Wall Street for 8 years.
Well, it's a funny thing. It was all marketing. I mean, it was a thing of beauty, the marketing they did for him in 2008, making him seem like a progressive, making him seem like the anti-war candidate. And my late friend and mentor, Glenn Ford, said in 2008, the anti-war movement and Goldman Sachs were all backing the same candidate. So that's what we got with him. But that leads to bigger questions about how we can impact change in this country, where we have a system that's rigged against the people, that's rigged in favor of these interests that we've mentioned. And whether they have a D or an R behind their name, it's the same story. I remember in 2020, the CEO of one of the defense contractors was asked, did he want Trump or Biden to win? And he basically said, we get what we want regardless of who wins. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, we don't care, because he gets the same thing regardless of who's in that position.
Well, I want to wrap up with this. We've talked about a lot of things going on in the world, and you mentioned how kind of sad the anti-war movement is over the past many years, at least compared to, I suppose, its biggest days. So what gives you hope right now, both in the U.S. and globally?
I want to be hopeful that the people will speak for themselves, and especially people who live in what are called democracies, and really act like, what does that mean? It doesn't mean they let you vote every couple of years. It's supposed to mean that you speak up. It is supposed to mean that that you're able to act and speak for yourself. That's when we have change. That's the only time we have change, when we have a quote unquote good president. It's because they're forced to do it by the people acting in concert. And we desperately need this right now, where these years of neoliberal austerity have brought us to a minimum wage of $7 and change, and a huge military budget, and a mass incarceration system, all the things that we've been talking about. None of that is going to change unless the people change. We cannot depend on the electoral system. It's not built to benefit us, and so it does not. But it's on us, and we have history behind us, and that is what we should be optimistic about.
Thanks so much, Margaret. I really appreciate this. And people can go to Black Agenda Report, the website, to follow your work. Is there anywhere else they should follow you?
Yes, I'm on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog. I'm trying all these new sites, but I keep going back to Twitter. I'll just leave it there. So blackagendareport.com and Freedom Ride Blog on Twitter. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret Kimberley. A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Listen, this show is completely viewer supported. So if you like these interviews, if you think they should keep going, I hope you'll go to patreon.com/behind the headlines. Yes, it's in coordination with Mint Press News, but it's completely viewer supported. So please do that. Also, of course, check out Black Agenda Report. As I said, the excellent site that should be far better known than it is. We've all the great independent sites have dealt with horrific censoring and suppression over the past several years. So the only reason Black Agenda Report isn't in your feed right now is, if it's not, is because there are powerful people at big tech that do not want it in your feed. So blackagendareport.com and Margaret Kimberley. And go to patreon.com/behind the headlines. Also check out my interview with Richard Wolff from yesterday. This is all at youtube.com/behind the headlines. You can get all my interviews there. Scott Ritter, Stephen Donziger, Greg Palast. So many awesome interviews there that I hope you will check out. And I will see you next week. The guests will likely be Alex Rubenstein and Katie Halper. So I will see you then, and keep fighting.